So, welcome to the second to the last class before, well, the one before the final. I hope you all saw my email, which I was informing you, but I'm going to recap here, of course, the overall requirements on the final, which is the same, exactly the same, in fact, as the, let's see if we can do the speaker view here. Should be the same exactly. It will be the same. I'm sorry, as the midterm was exactly. We'll go over that at the point where we finish the last few new slides that we have for this semester from the syllabus, and it will depend on how much time it takes to segue, because whether we have a break or not, or just go straight through, either way, we're going to end early. I can promise you that. Um, and of course, you guys are lucky. This is, I don't know, if there aren't any Warriors fans out there, I'd be surprised. But this has happened when I've been teaching. Almost every year, the Warriors get into the playoffs. Not tonight, but tomorrow night's a pretty major game, right? With LeBron versus Curry. Um, should be interesting. And it's right in the middle of when my class on Wednesday, which is the other class I teach, is supposed to be reviewing, but I have to do the review. So that class, I'm going to try to just get the review done and end extra early. But we still have a couple more news slides. I did say that to you guys in an email and also at the end of last week. Okay, let's see now. Let me see if I can get to the speaker view here, because what I want to do is show you. Why is it doing that? It's doing something weird, jumping around. Okay, let's give it one more try here. So you get to be the featured person for tonight, I guess. It's wanting to just stay on one image. Let's see, gallery view, speaker view. Very strange. Okay, I'll give it one more try up here. There we go. The only reason I'm doing that is, first of all, I can see the time. I couldn't when the screen was full of one image, and I can try to keep moving along, efficiently. And we guarantee, as I said, I guarantee we will end early tonight. But whether we have a brief break and do it that way will depend on where we're at about 8:20. I don't know about the rest of you, but sitting in front of a computer screen and on a hard back chair for more than an hour and a half, I really, that's about my limit to be able to focus and stay concentrated on the topics at hand. So if we get close to like 8:20 and there's still a bit more to do, or it looks like we're in that heading that way, we might take an even earlier break, like 8:15. But let's keep it to, if we do a break, let's keep it to 15 minutes, and then we'll do the review if we do it that way. So the review is all in one sitting, one discussion, which is really not a formal review like it would be if we were in person in an in-person class. Of course, we'd do the slide review. But since you all have the option of going to YouTube to see every single slide again that you witnessed in the live sessions, or any you missed, of course, then that should give you, that option in a way that wouldn't disadvantage anybody. The point is, we're going to reduce the main value of tonight's lecture after we finish the few new slides left, will be to reduce the list, as we did for the midterm, by at least 40% of both the slides to know from the syllabus, the ones that you need to study, cut that at least 40%. And the same, well, roughly, that's because there aren't that many terms to know, by about a third at least on that list of terms to know. So you'll know what not to waste your time studying, okay? And the test, I've already created it, and it is in a PDF format waiting to be sent to you. And this is what it looks like. You recognize the format, you should, because everyone here, I'm sure tonight, took the midterm. So the same value of points for each section, the same number of slides, 8 total, plus 1 extra credit optional slide. And then also the true false, which of course are going to be new ones. Obviously, I'm not going to give that away. I'll send this to you by 5, maybe even a little early, 4:30, 5 o'clock on Tuesday, because you can watch it live. You should, because that gives you that option to make sure you understand everything. If there are questions, at some point, of course, you should do that by chat during the test, or at the end, or the beginning. That's the real time Zoom session. And then after that, as I've said before, but I'll also remind everybody yet again in one more email next week that the test will be posted on YouTube for 2 days, 48 hours, from about 5 p.m. on Thursday, the week of final exams, next Thursday, of course, until 5 p.m. on Saturday. I have to start getting them logged in and grading them that Sunday, so I can't push it past that. Okay, extra credit. Congratulations. I'm not going to mention names, but I think there's only one person, he knows who he is. I'm giving away to TMI right here, that I had emails back and forth, who's been persistent enough to get the full 50-point maximum of extra credit, which raised that student's grade a whole, at least one letter grade, maybe more. So anyone who's thinking that they might want the margin or cushion, a margin of error, whatever, safety margin, you should remember that the extra credit options, again, I'll remind you with another email, are due no later than when the final is due. I used to give you an earlier deadline for that. So realistically, I can start entering the extra credit options. Actually, I meant to say when the final's given. I misspoke. I apologize. I've said this before and it's in the syllabus, but that's been months. So I'll repeat it and restate it in at least one, if not two more emails. The deadline for extra credit needs to be before the test, because once the tests come in, that's all I have time to do is concentrate on grading those, entering them and calculating your final grades and submitting them. I only have 4 days, 4 working days to do that. So the deadline for extra credit needs to be probably, well, that Thursday. That would make sense. And that gives you a little extra time if you don't know, once you finish the test or think you've at least taken the first version on the actual Zoom class or looked at it on YouTube, you can decide. So midnight Thursday would probably be the cutoff. I might extend it till 5 p.m. on Friday, but that's pushing my time limit. And I don't want to have any issues with anyone not getting your grades on time submitted, not just by me, but all the teachers. I think I told you guys, and then we'll get on to tonight's topic, that they moved the deadline up a couple of days, not 4 days, from the 6th or 7th. It used to always be at the end of the first week of June, and now it's on the 4th. I'm not sure why. Okay, maybe you saw Dr. Chong's, this is the last announcement type thing, and then I'll take questions if there are any about extra credit or what I mentioned about the test before we get to the review at the end of tonight's class. Is Dr. Chong seems to be heading in a direction that might be a little modification of his absolutely no lecture classes in the fall. And I was told by my department chair, Dr. Hiroshi Chigami, I've known him for years. He was chair years ago. And then again, now he's been the chair art department we're talking about, of course, for at least 2 years. And so he's had a lot to deal with the pandemic. And he said, yeah, I did ask that you be allowed to teach a class in person. And if so, I hope I might see a couple of you in person, masks or whatever the rules are, mask or no mask, in the fall. And you'll know, of course, it'll show up if that is the case. Right now, I'm scheduled for 2 online classes and 1 in person. That'd be a Wednesday night class, Art 2.1, which is a very different subject. Of course, it's ancient, well, actually prehistoric through medieval art. So maybe some of you might get to go back in person, and other departments, I hopefully will do the same. All right, before we proceed with tonight's topic, anybody have any questions about anything I've mentioned or extra credit? Or don't forget your late papers. Those I really, really am going to need to get from you. Again, no later than the deadline for the extra credit. So it'll probably be Thursday at midnight of next week. But if you haven't done them, probably nobody in the class now, you guys are the core group, as far as I can tell. You've always mostly attended every class you're able to, and I'm sure observed all the deadlines as best as you could. But I still don't have second papers from, according to the roster, half a dozen or more students. So if that applies to anyone that's listening or hears it as it's recorded or posted on YouTube, or a fellow student in this class who hasn't gotten it done, they really need to get on the ball, or they won't have time to study for the test, for the Final. Okay, any questions at all right now from anybody about anything we just talked about, or anything about grades or actually? All right. So we're going to finish up with, well, it's early modern architecture, not really 20th century. And that's how I labeled the syllabus. I might have said 20th century in the YouTube posting, but either way, it's the same as the syllabus. All the slides that are must know, of course, that we cover in this class all end up on the YouTube postings by the end of the week by 8 p.m. on Friday. So I've already given the context, so we can go straight to screen share. Hopefully this will be pretty easy. We have a couple of places tonight to see that I think you'll agree are, well, they're iconic. That's how I would put it. They're so, they were, when they were first completed, so influential and so far ahead of their time that they inspired the last work of art we're going to see tonight, which is from the very, very late 20th century in Paris. And yet both of these structures were over 100 years earlier. Okay, so here we go. This is the first of the remaining 3 must knows for tonight. So yeah, you do need to take the notes, of course, on the meaning of this slide. Okay, let me just take a quick caffeine infusion. There we go. All right, so this one, we skipped over it. If you recall, I said that last week. So that's why we're going back to it. I wanted to get good images. There was a really terribly out of focus black and white print that just didn't do it justice. So here we go. This is the first of tonight's must knows. Paxton, the architect's name, his last name was Paxton. Paxton, the Crystal Palace, 1851. The Crystal Palace, just like it sounds, 3 words, 1851. This was the first World's Fair. And I would imagine a couple of you now, a few of you, I don't, it's okay, right? Mentioned Luis and a few other students over the last 2 times I've taught this course. The last time was in person at the campus, and now, of course, this way. Would know this if they had an interest in World's Fairs. And a couple of you, like, as I mentioned, a couple in this class, have written papers about buildings that were either influenced by the World's Fair or done extra credit mentioning, the legacy of World's Fairs. We'll never have another one in this country. It's Disney's fault. Walt Disney World and all the other permutations of Disneyland have pretty much made these kinds of events in this country extinct. Superfluous, however you want to say it. But they're still holding World's Fairs all over the rest of the world. So when I said this was the first World's Fair, that means that the whole event of the very first ever World's Fair in London, it was in London, was all in this one building. Well, if you can see clearly, I assume you all can, right? This is a really great photograph. I've never seen it before. I prepared for the class. What you see here, sorry, let's admit this person. Good timing. We're just starting. We're just starting the first slide. This is the Crystal Palace. Paxton, again, the architect, Paxton, and the date is 1851. Again, the entire first World's Fair, 60 nations. That's a fair number. That was most of the countries in the world. Now we have like 200 countries throughout the world, right? But back then there were only about 65 or 70 countries. So almost all the countries in the world came to London and brought their exhibits, and they were all housed in this. Look at this building. For that far back, it should surprise a few of you. This is huge. It's bigger than any train station in New York or London or Paris, right? Which were inspired, the major glass and steel sheds, they're called train stations, from the late 1800s all the way through the mid 1900s, right? The last century and a half. More recent ones don't do this. Are made out of glass and steel. And if you've ever taken the train, I know most of you probably haven't, but if you ever do, when you go to Europe, you will. I'm sure you will. Right? Get a rail pass, of course. It's the best way to travel. If you can afford it, first class. Anyway, the point is these train stations are all over the world, not just in Europe, but that's where they started, these glass and steel. So this was the prototype. Here's what to write. This is not only the first World's Fair all in one building, but it set the stage, you could say, or the, prototype. It is the prototype. Just say that. It is the prototype, or was the prototype, for almost every other modern functional building from the last half of the 1800s through the first half of the 1900s, such as train stations, other World's Fair buildings, of course, and other large public exhibit halls. Okay, so what you see here is the structure of the building, and the architect was inspired, it's all part of the meaning now, by the concept. I mentioned it last week with Louis Sullivan. He used this phrase a lot for his early skyscrapers. We already covered him last week, right? Or 2 weeks ago, actually. So now you could just say that this architect, Paxton, was inspired by the concept that he, used. He didn't coin the phrase, but he used the concept form follows function, and you probably heard that at some point, maybe if you've ever heard anybody describe how buildings and public structures are designed. Well, guess what? Paxton was an engineer first before he became an architect, and it shows. This is a very functional building, but it's also quite meant to be an impressive, or have, I should say, have an impressive impact on anybody who comes into it. I mean, look at these people down here lining up to get in line to go in. See, they're down there, and they're going to go in this up these stairs and into the entrance. This was one. Here's part of the meaning now, and I'll repeat it when we get to the space description for the formal analysis too, because here the size is part of the meaning on this slide. This structure not only housed 60 different nations exhibits, right, from all over the world, but the dimensions made it the largest building ever built up to that time. The largest inhabitable or occupiable, however you want to say it. Now, the Great Pyramid is quite big, if not maybe more total weight, mass, because we discussed that. It was the tallest structure, and still this was built. This was about 180 feet tall. Look at that. That's like an 18-story skyscraper. And here's the more important and impressive fact about, and this is still under the meaning now, it was two intersecting hallways. The building, this is just one of them. Well, you can sort of see here, right? At the right angle, here's the side wing. So it was two intersecting wings or hallways, one of which was over a third of a mile long, and the other was a quarter of a mile long. That's a lot of space. Inside, it could hold over 200,000 people. So when it was completed, it was the largest interior space. That's a safe way to write it. If you say building, then you get into the debate, well, what about the Great Pyramid, or Cologne Cathedral in Germany, which was the largest stone building, tallest stone building in the world then. So you have to get into all that. You could just say, again, it was the largest interior space that had ever been built, and it could hold 200,000 people at once. Way more than Disneyland can ever hold at any one time. Okay, let's go inside and take a look at it. I have to get this larger, and you get to see this is not as well focused, but it's better than the one that came from Stockstead, the textbook files at least, and it's colorized. There was no color photography in the 1850s. I think everyone knows that, but we didn't have time to cover 20th century or early photography. But the color photos are a 20th century invention. They didn't exist before 1900. So this is a print, and it might look a little bit like a touched up photo, but it's actually a print or engraving, and it's of course got some touch up on the colors, but it gives you some idea. Look at that ceiling. That immense ceiling. This was the long wing, the wing that was about a third of a mile long. And I think you can see right here is where one of the other two wings goes off in either direction. So it formed a cross. It was a cross shape, like a quote, Christian cross, unquote. One long aisle and then shorter arms at a right angle to that. And again, the dimensions are going to be very rough, rounding off. We're about the longest wing or aisle was about a third of a mile long, and the shorter one was about a quarter of a mile. So this is the opening day, by the way, and Queen Victoria was there to open it up, and I think that's supposed to be her, but no, she had to be standing up on a platform. So this is probably just after it opened. But if it's on the test, we certainly should stick to the photograph that has, I think, the best image here. Whoops, that's going the wrong way. Sorry. that arrow disappeared. This is the view. It'll be on the exam. You might say, oh, it doesn't have color. Well, there weren't any color photos, A, and B, there was no color to this building. There was color to the exhibits inside, but the building was strictly a functional structure with metal framing and glass walls. That's it. Literally, the building showed the structure from the outside, and you just saw the interior view, both inside and outside. People could see the naked, they even called it that, the press. They were critical. Some people didn't like this building when it was first opened. The naked structure before your eyes shocked some people. They were used to Victorian ornament. This was so radically ahead of its time that a lot of people weren't ready for it. Another fact about it, and we'll get you like two more things and then do a formal analysis, is that it survived nearly 100 years and was used for many other exhibitions, no other World's Fairs, because World's Fairs got to be so popular, they started attracting more and more exhibits in more and more countries, and they needed several buildings for each future World Fair. So being the first World's Fair, they thought, well, let's just put it all in one building. So this guy was an engineer who had built bridges and factories before Paxton. That was his background. It shows this is a functional building. I don't know about anybody else, but I think it's beautiful in its simplicity. And yet at the same time, it has some pleasing curves to it and some, obvious rhythms. We'll get to all those elements in just a minute. Okay, one other fact, I said it survived nearly a century. It didn't it was destroyed. Sorry, it survived, didn't disappear. I started to say it survived until 1939. Some of you know what happened that year. World War II began, and I used to think that, I see, the Germans bombed it. No, it was destroyed earlier that year in a fire, an accidental fire. But that's nearly 100 years, from 1851, right, the year it opened, till 1939. That's pretty remarkable, and it continued to be used for a lot of public events. Again, for the handful of you who really find movies with some historical reference to what we're talking about of interest, I'll mention to keep it brief. There's a great movie called The Great Train Robbery. True story. Sean Connery, Donald Sutherland, great cast of a bunch of other great English actors. It's a true story of the first time that several millions, back in the 1850s, several millions of dollars worth of gold was robbed from a so-called secure train line heading either to or away from London. And there's a scene, the point is, in that movie where they recreate, I don't know how they didn't have CGI. The movie was early 70s. I don't think they had CGI that far back, right? But they managed to recreate this building. And a couple of the thieves planning this gold, robbery from a train, I think it's Sean Connery, Donald Sutherland, the two main, masterminds. They meet in front of this building and then walk inside of it. It's a very interesting scene because I don't know how they recreated, but they made it look like they were really standing in front of this building. It's called The Great Train Robbery. I know it's on Amazon and or Netflix. Anyway, so let's now do the formal analysis. So you see the influence of this building. It's why I say it was iconic. It is completely symmetrical because the wings were the same length, right? Either the long, wing and or the shorter ones had the same. So it's balanced left to right, but you wouldn't say top to bottom because obviously you see how it gets narrower as it goes towards the top of the ceiling or the roof. All right, the rhythm, it should be obvious here. The iron girders and the glass plates. That's it. Those are the two actual materials. So the textures are not simulated. They're the real smooth textures of glass and metal. That's it. There are no other textures here. And of course, it is both stable and dynamic. You can see that it's stable on most of the walls, but the roofs on both wings, the side, arms, if you want to call them that, the shorter wing and the main hallway, those are, of course, dynamic. The colors, well, I might as well go ahead one more time and you'll see that this, they kind of did a blue. Now, that's not part of the design of the building. Those are decorative panels added later. The building itself had no color. You could just see the sky. So it was transparent, of course, on the glass. And the metal girders were painted black. So this is really not the best view to show you, but it's the only one that wasn't so out of focus that you could at least see some of it. So we'll stick to this again. As I said, this will be the one that's on the exam. There's no warm or cool colors. None. It's neutral. There's only black painted metal and transparent glass. Okay, then for space, I've already mentioned that it was about 100 and it was actually between 160 and 180. Just say over 160 feet tall. That's good enough. Like a 16-story skyscraper could fit inside. So over 160 feet tall, the ceiling on the main wing. Of course, it was shorter, obviously, on the side wings. And that wing, the other dimension you need to have for if it's on the essay part of the exam for space, is that it was about or nearly a third of a mile long, and the shorter wing or the crossing, if you want to call it that, the arms, was about a quarter of a mile long. Okay, and then we have, there is no technique for modeling. It's just whenever the shadows from the sun come through the glass, of course, so there's no technique for modeling. The line is there, of course. You can't see there is some cast iron decorative detail, very minimal. Maybe we can see it a little, now you can't really. But you can't see that in this slide. So you could just say the line is the visual lines formed by the girders, pretty much all the way up through the top of the roof there. There's no carved or drawn line. And let's see, the largest mass would be the central wing or central hallway, I would call it that. And I wouldn't break it down. It's just two major masses. The other one is the shorter or crossing section of the arms of it that are the second largest mass. So you just keep it to two masses. And it's balanced. Yeah, we covered that. Let's see, rhythm. Am I missing anything here? Okay, I think we covered it all. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to go to a structure that is beyond iconic. It's almost a cliche. Every gift shop in the entire country of France has at least a half a dozen versions of this for sale, from tiny little things you can hold in your hand to actual scale models you can go home and build in your den or your, I've seen people do that. Yeah, 12-foot tall models of the. Of course, you know what it is, but in case it isn't obvious, here we go. The next MustKnow. Eiffel is the architect, and he was also an engineer. We'll talk about who he was in a minute. Eiffel, Eiffel. That's how it's pronounced. And of course, I'm sure you all know the title, the Eiffel Tower, 1889. Okay, so what we have here is another World's Fair structure. But this is not a building. That's an important distinction. It's part of the meaning. Buildings, as I said, I think last week, right? Or maybe it was the week before, the last 2 weeks we've been covering architecture. I think I mentioned more than once, but if you weren't here or you didn't write it down, you should now. As part of the meaning of this, this is not a building. It was never meant to be inhabited or for people to work and or live in it 24 hours a day. That's what a building is. It's meant to be inhabited. This isn't meant for inhabitation. It's meant for a symbolic statement of the government of France to celebrate. Here's the reason. I'll say it once and repeat it slowly. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. They had a World's Fair. They had a bunch of, in fact, I think it's the city with the most World's Fair in the world is Paris. Pretty sure that's right. Yeah, maybe London is close second. So this was for a major World's Fair, not the first one ever held in France. They'd had 2 or 3 before. So just say a very successful, it was a very popular World's Fair that celebrated, the reason for the fair was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. And so this was supposed to grab, when it succeeded in grabbing the world's attention. This was the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 40 years. It overtook as part of the meaning, if you want to write it this way, you can say it finally overtook the record set by the Great Pyramid at 480 feet when that was new. Of course, by the time this was built, it was more like 460 feet. That's about less than half the height of this. So this is 900. You almost misspoke. Terrible. I will say it again. Part of the meaning is, how big is it? 988 feet tall. Now, some of you may be asking yourself, what? Why didn't they just go to an even 1,000 feet? I'm going to save the answer to that in a minute. Some of you already know the answer. Well, why wouldn't they just make it a nice round figure and it's more impressive? There's a logical reason, but we'll get to that. So just say it's about, you can say over 908. It might be 987 feet in some inches. So it's about 988 feet, or well over 980 feet. And it was overtaken. You can use this part of the meaning because I think it's pretty easy to remember uh, or look up in your notes. Remember, you have an open book test, of course. That this was the world's tallest structure for just under 40 years. Does anybody know what overtook it? I'll bet one or two of you do. What structure
Was it
became?
the it was either the was it the Chrysler building or
Yeah,
the
you got
Empire
it.
State Building?
Most people, excellent. Very, yes, you're right. Because most people would guess, understandably, the Empire State Building, but the Chrysler Building was finished a year earlier. So in 1930, that's over 40 years. Yeah, over 40 years. I think I have that right. The Empire State Building was open, I think, in 31. Anyway, they're both open within a few months of each other. But the first one was, you're right. So just say it that way. The Chrysler Building in New York City was the first building over 1,000 feet on Earth, period. And only retained the title of the tallest building. You'll have to write this is more extra, footnote stuff. But it briefly, less than a year, and the Empire State Building came along. And when it opened up the next year, it was another, I think, 50 feet taller or something. Okay, so the point is this held the title for over 40 years. You can just say about 40 years of the tallest structure on Earth. And the architect, as part of the meeting, was Eiffel, George. And the French put an S on the end, like his first name. George is George, we would just say. Eiffel was an engineer, again, just like Paxton. He had designed factories, bridges, train stations, and it shows, doesn't it? Because this again has a pretty straightforward, you could say form follows function applies here, but not as clearly, because what is the function? To show off the power, and you could say, glory. Yeah, I know what else word would you use? The French would have said that, of the French nation, right? At this point, they were a colonial power, really, of course, a major one, second largest after the British Empire in the world at this time. So they were showing off their power and their wealth. Here we go. Okay. Welcome. We're just getting to the second must know slide now. This is the Eiffel Tower. You probably know the right Eiffel. The architect is Eiffel and the date is 1889. Again, what we're saying about the architect is he was tasked, given the task, you could just say tasked, by the French government now, not the city of Paris, the government that ran that World's Fair. World's Fair is too big for one city to sponsor. It's always the governments of the country that host them. So the French government assigned him this task because they really were impressed with his work on bridges and train stations and other structures, none of which were buildings. Those are structures. This is a tower. It's a kind of structure. It's not a building. Now you can, I bet some of you have been here. I think I know a few of you said in your mini bios you'd been to France. And I assume if you go to France and you're going to go to Paris, you're going to go here. There are gift shops and restaurants at two levels here. One about a third of the way up the tower, right? And then further up here, right, at the top. It's three levels. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. There's a much larger restaurant which can hold like scores of people. I stopped and had a beer or something in those, but most of the time people don't do that unless they're just they've been there already, or for some reason they're not interested in going to the top. People usually take the elevator straight to the top. And maybe some of you have seen the Jackie Chan movie where he goes up here and has an impossible kung fu fight with the bad guy, and they both nearly fall off the top. It's a well done scene. I don't know if they actually filmed it here. They probably did with some some nets below or something. Anyway, so this is over 950 feet, and then when you add the spire, it reaches that height of almost 990. You can just say over 980 feet. So here's another part of the meeting I hinted at a moment ago. Why didn't they just go all the way to make it 1,000 feet even? Anybody know? If you've been to Europe or you have friends from there, you might already have an idea.
I'm shooting in the dark, but doesn't it have something to do with the material that he was using?
Well, that's not a bad guess. Actually, it's a pretty logical one. No, it has to do with the difference between American systems of measurement. Now somebody maybe get, and the rest of the world practically uses a much different system. Anybody know what I'm talking? Because no, Americans were supposed to learn this. The metric system is the reason. The metric system is not the same as, use feet and they don't use inches. inches. Sorry. So it's 300, I think it's 330 meters, and a meter is over 3 feet. So just keep it simple. You don't need to write that specifically, but you should say that the reason that this didn't actually top out at a full 1,000 feet was because it's measured differently. All of Europe and even that far back, most of the rest of the world, besides us and I think maybe Australia, use the metric system. So they measured in meters, meters, and so it's an even number of meters. You don't have to know exactly, but you should know the feet because that's what we use here. That it is just under 1,000 feet, and that's the reason. He could have gone higher, but he figured around 300 and whatever the number is, 330 was a nice round figure. Okay, and of course you may also know that it has stairs and an elevator. Now, you don't have to, this is the last thing I'll say about the meeting. You certainly don't, most people, when they go there, don't even think about climbing the stairs. The first time I went to Paris, well, the first time I was homeless and I got rousted from the park bench, I was trying to sleep. Not that time, but the next time I went with a friend, she and I walked all the way up there. And that's when we stopped and had refreshments at each of these three levels because it's a major feat to go up there, even if you're, like we were in our 20s. But most people don't do that. They take the elevator and you have to wait in lines. You can see from this photo, there are lines of people waiting to get in. I mean, it's probably one of the most popular sites on Earth. And it's on the last fact about the meeting now. It's on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Absolutely one of the first structures to be on that list. Again, that means what? That the United Nations and all the governments that are members, which is every government in the world, except I think Switzerland or one or two other little countries, um, agree it's one of the structures on Earth so important to the history of the human race, not just France or Europe, that it deserves to be preserved and protected. And there's funding for that. I don't know if the UN provides it or just, but you can just say it's protected by being on the UNESCO World Heritage List. By the way, Hitler, don't write this unless you read it. Well, you could if you, when he, his occupying army was forced out by, yes, my father was one of those soldiers who helped liberate Paris. I'm kind of proud of that. And what a party that was after the Germans were finally forced out. The point is, when the Germans were forced to retreat from Paris, there's actually a movie, a book, a play, even, I think, I'm sure documentaries, Is Paris Burning is the title of the movie and the book based on this story. The Hitler ordered all of the monuments, including the Eiffel Tower of the French, heritage, to be blown up, dynamited. The Louvre, right? All of those other major museums, all the beautiful buildings, and the Eiffel Tower. And luckily, the German commanding general said, no, not this time. And I think he was shot, arrested and shot, forced, back behind the lines for a trial in Germany because he didn't carry out Hitler's orders. Obviously, that would have been a tragedy if that had happened. Okay, so formal analysis. Balanced, well, yes, it's symmetrical. You'd have to say that. And then, of course, it is unbalanced, clearly unbalanced toward the bottom. If you drew the line halfway up the tower, it'd be right about here. The rhythm should be obvious, but in case it isn't, there are these Art Nouveau decorative details. Now, I didn't mention that word during the meaning part, so you don't have to add it to your notes if you don't want to. But the style of this is a lacy kind of organic motifs, like supposedly the various kinds of plants. These are supposed to be the tops of various blossoms. I'm not sure which kind. I'm not much of a botanist. My wife would know. So the decorative detail, just keep it simple, is of course uh, the rhythm of it is the repeated iron girders, the structural part, plus there is some decorative detailing on the cast iron work. And that is the real texture here. There's no cemented textures, which is the real, again, just like the Paxton's, Crystal Palace, there's only two textures, real smooth metal and real smooth glass. Okay, and if you had to break it down into masses, I would think you'd have to call the top third, if you break it down by you know sections this way visually left to right. I guess you could say the top 2/3 where this tower rises to the peak there, that might be the largest mass, but it's really one mass, you can just say it that way. It's dynamic. The only thing stable, in fact, every part of it is curved, and all of the girders, of course, are across crosshatch effect there, and then there's these decorative details. So it's almost entirely dynamic except for the three gifts shops slash cafes. They're all three used that way, all three of these levels. Of course, those have to be stable. All right, and the color is warm. It's a warm kind of a rust, almost like a light rust color. Believe me, it's not rusting. They aren't letting it rust. And then we have the modeling is just the shadows created by the sun. And for space, we've already said, but I'll say it again. It's about, just say nearly 990 feet, or just say over 980. I might be off by 2 or 3 feet. Over 980 feet tall. And then it has these three different size of gift shops and cafes. And you don't need to know how big those are. And then let's see, are we forgetting anything here? Modeling, texture, line. Oh, yes. The line here is purely visual, where you see all the cast iron girders, and the decorations are limited to the bottom level, the first level. But those, of course, create some kind of visual line. Now, I'm going to go to the last must know. In order to do that, I need to do stop share. And then we did this before where I can get to the, whoops, sorry, architecture part 2, because we still have one more must know. And in order to do this, just give me about a minute or less, hopefully. Okay. And then we're going to go back to, restore down all this. Okay, that I should be able to, yeah. All right, get us back to where I can do the screen. Okay, it's about 2 more steps, should be. This should do it. Did everybody see this, folks?
Yeah.
Good. This is an important structure. And again, you could call it iconic or not, because it's only been around for about, well, it's almost 30 years, 30 years now. My God, I remember when it first opened. But it's nowhere near as long, lived, hasn't had as long a life as those last two structures. So it's harder to call this iconic. But you know what it is? If you've traveled anywhere, even downtown San Francisco, it's open now, right? Safe. I just went there with my daughter. We had a wonderful day. First time in 15 months I've been to downtown San Francisco. And all over the world, in the US and other, at least in big cities, you see these kind of pyramids. And so here's the first famous example. So this is our last must know for tonight. All right. And this one, it's at the end of week 15's list. We didn't get to it. Pei is the architect's name. P-E-I, Pei. And this is the pyramids at the Louvre, or as they say in French, Louvre. Louvre, the famous art museum. Pyramids at the, if you wrote of the, I wouldn't take points off. I don't take points off on the answers from the syllabus. Of course, they're in front of you. You should get them, you have your syllabus when you're doing your test, of course. But if you put a slightly different preposition like of or in, well, it's not in though. I wouldn't say in. They're outside the museum. You can see that. The museum is the building right behind the pyramid. So again, the right title one more time is Pyramids at the Louvre 1989. And the architect is PEI. Okay, let's start with the fact that this project was meant to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, right? Just doing the math, 1789, 1989. So the design for it was an international competition. And I.M. Pei, that is his initials, I.M. Pei, he's one of my heroes. He lived to be 101 or 2 or 3, something like that, past 100 years old, still designing buildings, at least until his 100th birthday. He was ABC. He called himself that, American-born Chinese. And the man's a genius. He designed the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been there, the new one, the old one is not even used much anymore. They just use it for storage. But the actual National Gallery, where all the most valuable painting and sculpture in the whole country were owned by the government, at least in any big city, are in that building. He designed that building. He designed the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, of all places, right? And he designed the tallest bank building. It was at the time the tallest building, period, in Hong Kong, as well as several other skyscrapers around the world. And then he designed this. Now, what are we looking at? We're looking at the new entrance to the Louvre Museum, which is a stroke of genius. And now, how could that be? It's just a glass pyramid, a different kind of glass box. Oh, no, it's much more than that. Here's why they decided to have a contest, and Pei's design won, obviously. And then I'm going to tell you the controversy that caused: racism, nationalism, chauvinism. Oh, yeah, he got a lot of hate mail when he was chosen. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. What this does that nobody else's design had thought of is to get over 2 million people a year come. In fact, it's more like 4 million. It was 2 million, I think, when there was, some kind of a problem before. It used to only be that 2 million people, there we go, 2 million people a year could get into the Louvre. The lines, if you ever went their way, none of you probably would have. You weren't probably even alive. But if you try to get into the Louvre anytime before this entrance, which is inside this pyramid, was open, you had a wait of anywhere from an hour to 2, sometimes 3 hours to get into the building. Okay. That obviously is a problem. People were getting, especially in the winter when it gets pretty cold and damp and rains, and snows in Paris. So the government of France decided they needed a different approach, literally a different approach. This is what you should be writing, to help people get in more efficiently and more rapidly. And Pei came up with this idea. Now, let me ask, I doubt it, but has anybody here been to the Louvre and been through this entrance? Anybody here tonight? If you go to Paris, you should treat yourself to the Louvre, of course, but to go in the Louvre, you're going to go through this. So what it is the entrance. You can't even see it on this part of this slide because it just is the best view to give you a scale. See, there's a person taking a photo, and there are the little people back there. I mean, they're not little, but shows you how big it is. This is about a 45-foot high glass pyramid with a wide opening at one end, which is, by the way, on the side you can't see, okay? And extra wide escalators that get people into the building. I've never waited more than 20 or 30 minutes. I've been to Paris several times since this opened. And it makes, no one ever waits more than 45 minutes on a really, really busy day compared to 2 to 3 hours. And usually you're looking at 15 or 20 minutes to get into this climate controlled, energy efficient, green. Yes, it's a green structure. It doesn't waste energy. Another way he was ahead of his time. I mean, the word green design now is so common, it's a cliche, right? Everybody's talking about, oh, my building's green. There should be more green buildings, whatever. Like it's a new thing. Actually goes all the way back to 1890 when Bernard Maybeck came up with the idea, the Berkeley architect who taught Julia Morgan. We talked about him 2 weeks ago. Anyway, green design's been around a while, but this is one of the first major public structures to take that into account and to make a site where overstated, tens of thousands of people a day can enter this museum quickly, efficiently, and safely. And that isn't a small task. But it's more than just that. Another part of the meaning is, as long as when you get down there, what are you going to see? You're going to see the basement of the Louvre? No, you're going to see a giant open courtyard with entrances. They're not tunnels. I started to say tunnels. That's not the right word. Passageways to each wing of the museum. It's the largest art museum in the world. And it's not one building. It's a series of Renaissance palaces which were taken over by the French government and made into an art museum, right? With more art on their walls than any museum in the world. So there's several different buildings. And of course, most people want to go straight to the Mona Lisa, right? First, especially if it's their first visit. And you can do that by just looking at the walls. This is all I.M. Pei's ideas. And there's giant images of each of the most famous paintings in each wing. And in several languages below, it tells you what the exhibits are. So you don't even need a guidebook. You can get one, of course. They're available as soon as you get to the bottom. So what you do is you go underneath the plaza. It's a plaza. This is a fountain, okay? But the plaza in front of it is, of course, I think it's cobblestone. Anyway, just say it's an open plaza that used to be where horses and carriages would pull up to visit the king, right? When it was a palace. And that's all now. Underneath this is this giant courtyard, this open courtyard with easy to interpret access to each of the wings that the museum has. It's brilliant. And then, if that's not enough, last part of the meeting now, he figured out that people get hungry and tired, even if they've only waited 20 or 30 minutes, or they've gone to one of these wings and then they're hungry. Well, what could they do? The largest food court on earth is in that, you can say basement if you want, below ground. It extends beyond the entryway for, I think it's a half a mile. It's incredible the amount of food and the great quality of it. And of course, being Europe, they sell, every kind of wine you can imagine, and of course beers and other types of drinks and foods and drinks from all over the world. And he designed that too. There's this giant food court that then extends this way underground, for like at least a quarter of a mile. I think it's much more than that, like half a mile. It goes and goes. So you could just, and then you can get, if you want to, you can get a guide to that and know, well, I'll have to walk halfway down this aisle to find my, the Thai section or whatever it is. And of course, it's arranged by cuisine. It's just brilliant. It works beautifully. Last part of the meeting now, it's not a minor point. When he was chosen, a bunch of people, I think the internet didn't exist yet, did it? 89? No, it didn't. Yeah, of course not. But there were phone calls and letters from, sadly, stupid, small-minded people. How dare you pick a non-French architect? Why are we picking a Chinese man to design a building for a great European country? And racist and well, nationalistic, you could say it that way, ridiculous rhetoric. And to his credit, the leader of France at the time, who ran that, project and the commission, he didn't single-handedly pick IMP, but he agreed with their choice. He rose to their defense and said, "How dare you?" And so this man's got a world reputation just because he's an American and of Chinese American descent. If anything, is not only irrelevant, we should be honored that he chose to come here. So it's really popular now. Every time I've gone since it opened, the lines are, the people are saying how beautiful it is, and when they get inside, how easy it was, especially if they've been there before it opened that way and had to wait in lines, outside the entrance here for 2 hours. Okay, plenty on the meaning. Again, all you need is 6 sentences in a paragraph, or a few more if you choose, if it's on the essay part of the test. All right, formal analysis. It looks like a warm color because the lights inside are warm, but the structure is not. It's neutral. Of course, you can sort of see from this. Let's get up close. Obviously it's translucent glass. And again, actually this is, yeah, it's gray, but gray, it qualifies as neutral. It's some of the cast iron girders here, or they're not cast iron, they're stainless steel. My apologies, stainless steel. That one's painted black, as are the ones at the bottom. Now that I think about it, I guess they all are. It's been a while since I've been there, well over 15 years. Yeah, so just say black painted metal, contrasting with transparent glass. That's all neutral, no warm colors, so it looks warm when the lights are on at night. And then it's dynamic. I mean, just really no straight lines in it. I mean, even these lines that are the framing of the glass panels and the structure, exterior of the structure is visible, of course. Those are at a diagonal because it's by the definition of what a pyramid is. It's not balanced because, like all pyramids, it's wider at the bottom. But were you to draw a line on any side, down the middle, if you were standing just right there, well, you'd have to be over here because that's in the middle. I don't know how this guy got there. He must have tread water to get out there to take that picture. But anyway, if you stand around it and you look at any one side, it's going to be symmetrical from left to right. So of course it's balanced that way. It's a single mass. You can't really break it down. And for space, it's a 45-foot high glass pyramid. I mean, that's what it is. There's no technique for modeling. The modeling is just the, normal shadows from the sun in the daytime. And of course, at night, there's no technique for, there is no modeling. The lines are visual, of course. You can see them on the edges here of this. And the textures are the real smooth textures, just like with the last 2 slides, in fact, of glass and steel. And I think I mentioned the rhythm. No, I probably didn't, did I? Yeah, the rhythm would be each panel of glass and each side of the building. The sides are equilateral, right? I think that's the right word. I haven't taken geometry in a really long time. right. The space on each side is equal. And so, of course, um, you do have the balance and rhythm. Here we go. Oh, hi. All right. We were just finishing with this is the last must know. So it's going to be, of course, posted on YouTube by 8 p.m. on Friday. But I am going to talk about the test. So you want to stick around. And I think I'm going to do something you notice I got a little bit more efficient at segueing away from this one file to another. I think what we can do is let's do this. I hope everyone agrees, unless anyone strenuously objects, and then I guess I should take that into account. I just downloaded for the first time ever in any of my classes, and I didn't even need help from my daughter, some slides from the things we've already seen and might help you review because some of them are going to be on the exam from the Art Institute of Chicago, Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings. I'm not going to recap the lectures. Those are already on YouTube, but just so you can see what they look like in their real setting, because someday a few of you may get to, if you haven't already been, A, to Chicago, and B, not just for a layover at O'Hare Airport long enough, even just for 8 hours or so, you can take the subway from any part of the greater Chicago airport, bus station, train station, and get out right in front of that museum. It's the greatest museum of art, of painting, at least for painting, in the United States. The largest one is the Met in New York, and it's also very, very good, but it doesn't have as many. So I'm going to show you for like 10 to 15 minutes, and then let's see how people feel about whether we should just go ahead and not have a break. I'll literally take a consensus, or maybe it'll be unanimous. So I'm going to do the same thing I did. It'll take maybe 90 seconds, remember, for me to do the share. I just downloaded them and I tested to make sure that they were, here they are. When my daughter was 15, it was a kind of a birthday present to take her to Chicago, where I grew up. And so we're going to just look at just a little bit of the city itself. But in order to do that, I guess I've already done this, so it shouldn't take very long. We go back out of this. Now we back out of this. Yeah, it should be about another 45 seconds here. And then share screen again. I don't know if you guys, I think a couple of you were either from Chicago or had been there. So this is Michigan Avenue, which is one of the most iconic streets in America. It's one of the widest streets in any big American city. And it's right on the lake. And that's no accident, because when this was designed, the lakefront was muddy backwater. It probably stank, and it had refuse left over from the 1871 Chicago fire as late as the 1890s, when this avenue, 25 years later, was finally designed as a front door to, it was then the second largest city in America. When Chicago was being built up, it was number two, right? And New York always has been the largest American city. Now it's number three after LA, as you may know, but it's still a mega city, and that there are 10 million people in the metropolitan area. But let's go quickly, because the Art Institute is on Michigan Avenue, so we're just going to take a walk up here. This is one of the few buildings over 1,000 feet, and there are only a handful. And there's one in San Francisco, the Salesforce Tower. There's two now in LA. None in Seattle, one in Houston, one in Atlanta. Now there's a new one in Philadelphia, and then the others, there's 7 in Chicago and about a dozen in New York. So most of the 1,000 plus, they call them mega buildings, over 1,000 feet are just in those two cities, New York and Chicago. And Chicago was the birthplace of skyscraper. We covered that. So let's just go through this quickly. Yeah, this guy was homeless and he had a cat. There's the Art Institute, this building we're going to go take a look at in just a couple minutes. And so what you see if you walk along this avenue is the idea behind it. It's called City Beautiful Movement, and that influenced the designing of many cities, including all of Washington, D.C.'s public spaces. The same architect who designed this part of Chicago, the whole lakefront, they call it, not just the avenue, one street, but all the parks along the street. And even this building, he didn't design the building itself, but he designed the placement. That's the Art Institute, the museum we're going to go into in just a few slides here, but you get some idea. He was trying to give people a feeling of space. And the only other site in America that had even thought like that was the Central Park architect who had designed that park even before. But when this guy was, his name was Daniel Burnham, if you care to know, just getting, going, he decided cities need breathing room. And they need more than just a couple of parks. They need wide boulevards or open spaces that invite people to come and aren't only about getting as fast as you can from one site to another. That's the tallest building in the United States. If you're from New York or people from New York, they're going to argue, oh, the Freedom Tower. Cheat. The Freedom Tower has a spire that is about 30 or 40, maybe 50 feet taller than this. This is the actual structure. And when you go up to the top of it, it's 1,500 feet. The one in New York is 1,300 and some, the same height as the two twin towers that were destroyed at 9/11. And then they added a spire that goes up another 400 feet, and they call that's not part of the building. But hey, the AIA is run by East Coast people, so they can qualify it as the tallest building in America. All right, let's go now to, these just some of the skyline here. Oh, I'll go quickly through these. My daughter, obviously. So let's go to the Art Institute. That's where we were headed that day. And when you get to these are skyscrapers from around even earlier, 1894, 5. Look how modern they look for well over 130 years old or thereabouts. Okay, so we're going to go inside the Art Institute, and this should look familiar to you. It has a wall to itself. Paris Street, rainy day, and it is on the list, and we're going to do that review. The last thing tonight, of course, is cutting the list down, but I'm not cutting this slide from that list. So you can see how it's huge. In fact, these two figures walking towards you as you look at these at this scene are just about life size. It's an immense display area because that building was built for the 1893. This is it, by the way. I meant to show you. Well, you don't really have a close-up view of it. This building is from the first Chicago World's Fair. There've been two in Chicago and two in New York and two in San Francisco. And this was the 1893 fair. The Devil in the White City, a novel that was a bestseller for like 2 years or something, was about that fair. It was a pretty impressive event. And I showed you an example of one of the sites from that fair as one of the slides, I think 2 weeks ago. When you get close enough, you see the difference between the realism's portion of it, which would be the umbrellas and this couple and the man passing. Always looks like Grover Cleveland to me from the back. And this man in the middle ground, but everything behind this guy here, the middle to the far ground, that's obviously Impressionist. We already covered that. So if you didn't see that lecture, that is at the beginning of the post-Impressionism section, because this painter did a transition between the Impressionists, which he exhibited with them, and then he got kind of like, whatever, just tired of doing nothing but Impressionism. So he started blending realism and Impressionism. And so his work is considered somewhat transitional. But in any case, it's on the syllabus. And again, the title is Paris Street, Rainy Day. And you can see the Impressionism here in this. And then these are things from the collection from Asian and African and pre-Columbian is how they used to call it, right? Native American art. I'll go through them quickly, but they're just beautiful. And the collection of armor there is the best of any museum on this side of the Atlantic. It's huge. Now that's an Albrecht Dürer painting, actually, which we did cover Dürer, remember, in this class before the midterm. Yeah, look at these. Even these horses. This is not mock-up. This is not Hollywood. These are 500 to 1,000-year-old suits of armor, and including the ones on the horses and their weapons. Look at this. They're all authentic. And they come up as late as the 1600s. We talked about this last week. There were people, see this right here, this guy? That's how Captain, well, not with the spikes, but Captain John Smith had a helmet minus these spikes here and armor that went down to his knees. He was the first of the British colonists, right, to occupy, right, what's now the state of Virginia, along with these colonists that were on the ship with him, 1607, right? So that's what, 405 years ago? No, 415 years ago. And they were still wearing armor. I was saying it was still late medieval times in Europe. People were still going into battle wearing 3/4 suit of armor. But of course, a couple of years earlier, this is what they would have worn, a complete suit of armor as late as 1500s. Okay, so let's go quickly through these because I wanted to get to the last couple, and then we'll see if we should take a break. You can see how ornate some of these were made, custom made for nobles and high-ranking people that could afford to hire the greatest engravers. Yes, these are some works of art are decorated with actual engravings like this. And there's some
from all over Europe, aren't they?
Yeah, they're from all over Europe and some from Asia. It was at a museum called the Harding Museum. And I know none of you, one of you might have read my South Side Story, the novel about growing up in Chicago in the 60s as children of a family of a couple. I'm sorry, my parents both were starving artists. Oh, quite literally. We went hungry a lot when I was a kid because they were freelance artists, no steady income. And they took us to the museum where these came from. Now they've been transferred and for the first time put back on display since I was a kid. They tore the building it was in originally down. It was an actual European castle, English castle, transported stone by stone across the Atlantic by a rich industrialist in the 1920s and erected as a museum of medieval art. It was wonderful. It's called the Harding Museum. Anybody who grew up in Chicago and if they ever went there, they'd never forget the experience. This isn't quite as impressive because these aren't inside a castle, but the building is nice enough, and they're on display now. Yeah, look at it. I'm sorry that I don't know if that would be scary if you were dead in a dark alley or just oddly humorous. Yeah, this is pretty impressive, but we're going to go quickly because, and that shield is the oldest thing they had. It's over 1,000 years old. One of the first crusaders in 1000 AD or BCE would have carried it into battle in what's now, sadly, another battle zone. Of course, what's now Israel, right? When it was back then. And these are from Dresden, China, but they're just amazing. We'll go quickly. Okay, and then Buddha's images of Buddha there are just some of the most beautiful I've ever seen in the world. Look at these. These are 800 to 1200 years old from when Buddhism had spread out of India to a lot of the rest of Asia, which is now dominant, of course, in those countries that don't officially declare themselves atheists like the Chinese Communist government does. But not in India anymore. It's Hinduism now. These are all different images. And then these are the Native American pieces. This is over 220 years old, hand-painted buffalo hide skin for the chief of a Dakota tribe of warriors. And they had just won a battle. So it was, in commemoration of that. And then these are from, of course, well, it's not obvious. These are from early Mayan temples that were found in pretty good condition with maybe a couple of cracks, and these are African sculpture. That one is probably obvious, one of the high priests of a Mayan ceremony, and probably chanting or praying to one of their gods. And then this is a Chinese piece. Now these you can see things like this at the Asian Art Museum. You can still do that to extra credit now that it's safe and open and it's pretty easy. I think you better check though, if you're going to a museum in San Francisco, you may still need to have a time reservation. You know what I mean? Something that you reserved, and of course you'd pay whatever the normal fee is, unless you remember. But this is like 2 feet tall. No, 3 feet tall. Yeah, remember it's a bit bigger than most of these pieces. And then we'll end with just a couple of views here, and then we'll decide if we want to take a quick break. This is Shiva, the Hindu god/goddess, who is really all things, male and female, good and evil, Lord of destruction and creation. It's a wonderfully complex philosophy, and it's the most powerful Hindu god. And if you take our 1.1, right, we talk about that, of course. Okay, and this is just a view of the city skyline. Okay, so let's now, I'm going to do the stop share, and it is, here's what I think, well, tell you what, we're calling ourselves a democracy still. I think we are. Still, I think so.
I still say we're a democracy.
Well, I'm saying that I like to be democratic. I'm making a silly reference to the fact that we survived January 6th, the aftermath of it, and among other things, that the country's been through in the last few years. So just, I'm saying that we should probably take a consensus here. I could do a kind of a forced march, I call it, through the review, but maybe it's better to do that and end early or take a 15-minute break. It'll take us about half an hour to go through. So if we do it the other way, we'll end at about 8:15 or 8, and then I'll stick around and answer questions. I always do at the end for anyone who didn't get to answer or wasn't here when we started. The reason that might make sense is because I'm looking at the list, but I'm not going to rush through it. It's for your benefit. We're going to cut that list down in case you just joined us. There's 3 or 4 people who weren't here at the start, um, by 40% from the syllabus, and then do the same with the terms to know. So since it's now not quite 7:45, if we took a break and called it rounding off, rounding up, whatever, 15 minutes, we could then do 8 to 8:30 and end at 8:30, or we could go through and closer to 8:15.
We should go closer to 8:15.
I mean, discontinue, okay?
I personally say a break and then finish at 8:30.
Okay. How about we compromise and make it a 12-minute break? Well, now it'll be 10 by the time I sign off. That way we'll still end really early, well before 8:30. Is that okay? Yeah.
That works for me.
Well, yeah, I know. Now, see, I should take a show of hands or something, and then it's a little complex to do on a Zoom meeting. So we have a divided opinion here. I'm sorry, was that Annabelle? Who is the person who first spoke up? Mind if we do it the way, like take a, well, it'd be now 11-minute break. Start again at 7:55 and then end still about 8:25.
Yeah,
Depending
that's
on how many questions you have. Is that okay?
yeah, that's fine.
All right, thank you. No, I appreciate your input. All right, so I'm going to hit the pause thing here. All right, pause recording. And then we'll resume it, let's say, well, let's make it 12 minutes. So it'll be 7:57 because it's almost 7:45. Let's round it off. Okay. It just stays.
It started recording.
Yeah.
Yep, I see it too.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's get going. I know we ended up with more like a 14-minute break, but we're still going to end at about an hour earlier than we usually would. Okay, so you should have your syllabus in front of you, of course. And we are now going to go together and a pen. I would recommend you do this as we go, crossing. It's just what we did before the midterm, crossing out the numbers of slides that we are not going to keep for the study list. But in order to do that, to give you the ironclad promise, I put it in writing, of how many of at least 40% reduction, I need to count the total. So let's do that first. Anything, of course, that came up after the midterm, which would be, our midterm was week 7, right? March 9th, from the second half of that week forward. So if you want to count with me, you're welcome. You don't need to, but I'm going to do that now because that varies from semester to semester when I add or subtract slides. $88. I'm gonna, you'll see how this will work as we go, round up in your favor, or my students' favor, in terms of the numbers I cut, and I might end up cutting more than 40%. But if it was 90 slides, which it isn't, right? It's 88. I just counted very carefully, very slowly. 40% of that would be 36, right? No, 40% of 90 is 36. Since it's 88 slides, I'm going to go another step, rounding up again in your favor to keep the list to as slow as possible. If we want to end up, as I think it's convenient to do so, with a round figure, a nice round figure, one with a 0, that would be 38, because that's 2 more than the 40% that we just calculated, right? If you're following me, you got a calculator. If not, if you don't want to do it in your head, I don't think anyone will, right, contradict the numbers I've just given you, because I've done this for obviously every year. Well, actually, it isn't obvious. I always do this at the end of each semester. I never had a UC Berkeley art history professor that did that, except for one from Italy. And she made all of us really happy when she did the same thing I'm doing. And that was when I was like a senior at Berkeley. And I've always thought it's a reasonable gesture to, keep your lives are complex enough as students, and some of your parents, and you have jobs, So if we end up cutting 38, that's more like 44%. That's almost half. And that will leave us with 50. I might even go further. Now, does anybody have a calculator? I confess I should have grabbed it during the break, but my daughter had a bunch of questions to ask me about something. She's playing a game called Scattergories. Anybody ever played that with my wife? So I should have just said, I need to focus on just that. So I didn't bring my calculator I could go and get one from my office, but it's not in this building. It's in a small studio behind my house. Rather than have you sit there, you've already waited long enough. I don't think anyone would dispute that 40% of 88 is actually less than 36. And I'm going to go a little further. So let's, in other words, try to cut at least 38, which would leave you with 50 slides. And at some point, if it ends up being more convenient to round the total that we cut to 40, that'll leave with 48. That'll be nearly half, or very close to it. So we'll probably end up doing that. But let's start with the goal. We usually have to do this twice. You see, that's why. Oh, okay. All right. What now? Say that again. That's how many I'd have to cut, right? To get, that's a very,
I plugged it in. 88, 40% of 88 is 35.2.
Yeah. So you see, if I cut up to 38 or 40, in fact, I'm going to aim for 40, and then we're well above that, which is almost half. And that's, I think, a reasonable proportion to try and remove, so that you only have to study that many left. All right. Remember what we're doing. I hope everyone remembers from the midterm. We are all together now, everybody with pen in hand, or, well, I don't know any other way to do this. Going back to week 7, the first set of slides after the midterm, and crossing out, 2/5, 40% is 2/5, roughly, not quite half of each selection. And then we'll see how many we've cut at the end, and we may have to go back and cut a couple more to get to that number. All right. And then I'll repeat the whole list one more time before we move on to doing the same thing with the list of terms to know, and that won't take very long. And then before you all sign off, I'm going to recap the requirements for the test, how it's going to be graded, and a couple of tips on the writing of your answers or studying, because not everybody got an A or a B, even though it was an open book test. And this time, people shouldn't have a problem getting at least an A or B on their final, if they follow the proper procedure. Okay, so here we go. Everybody, week 7, below where it says midterm, second half, South and Southeast Asian art. All right, everybody's on that page. So let's cross off a couple of these. I'm going to cut the Shwedagon Stupa, partly because the location is, that's where all the problems, well, it's not the only place in the world there are problems right now, where it's called Burma traditionally, and still is by the people I talk to from there. But Myanmar, that itself can be confusing. I always try to cut the longest and most complex titles. So first one to cut is Sherdava, I'm sorry, it's hard to pronounce it, Shwedagon Stupa from Burma, or Myanmar. Okay. And then let's see. Oh, Akbar inspecting the construction. See, there's another long one of Fatehpur. That's the third one down. Everybody see that in week 7. I'll repeat this list before we move on to the next one. And then we need to cut at least one more from this group. Kitab Minar from India. The second one down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3 eighths. That's pretty close. But I want to leave at least one from each. One Buddhist, one Hindu, one mosque. So let's move on. We may have to cut another one from that group. For now, that's the three. Kitab Minar from India, Akbar inspecting construction of Fatehpur Sikri, actually, long title. And then the third one from week 7 is Shwedagon Stupa from Burma. All right, week 8. I'm going to cut a bunch here. Let's see. Ming Dynasty flask. Okay. I'm going to cut Gingbang Mountains from China. And then going further down, Landscape by Bunsai. And we may or may not have skipped over a couple of these, but it counts from the original total list, of course, to get to the 40% or more. All right. Lacquer box, cross that one out. And let's see. One, two, three, four out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. So we need to cut at least one more. All right. All right. Fusuma, even though it's an architecture slide and I'm partial to those. Fusuma by Aitoku, which is fourth from the bottom on week 8. Okay. Moving on, and we'll see how many we have when we get to the end. Week 9, next page. Okay. Lama from Bolivia. Bandolier bag from Kansas. As much as I like the Templo Mayor, the slide I found was not that clear of it because it's hard to get a good view. So Templo Mayor, the second one down in Mexico City. And let's see, I don't want to cut founding attention grizzly bear. Well, the slide of Taos was black and white and not that sharp. So let's cut Taos, Pueblo, New Mexico. Okay, that's 4. I'll repeat these when we get to the end. All right, moving on to week 10. Decorated building in the rural compound, Republic of Congo. Again, the longer the title, the more it is difficult to remember. All right. Reliquary Guardian from Gabon. Carved figure from Storehouse Doorway, because it's very similar to the Maori, sorry, I said it right now. The second time, Maori Meeting House. I'm definitely not cutting that. And let's see. Again, we're not quite cutting 40%. 3 out of 8 is 37.5%. Don't ask me how I know that. All right, I hate doing this, but I think we have to. Palace Store. I know what we'll do. We'll cut more from the painting because we have so many in each, and we'll see how it pans out at the end. That's the way we always have to do it anyway. All right, for now, we'll move on to week 11. Vigie Lebrun, Marie Antoinette with her children. As much as, we spent a long time talking about that, but it's not one of the iconic paintings of that era. So that's the second one down. All right, we see Vigie Lebrun, Marie Antoinette with her children. All right, then we're going to cut one of the two Davids. I'm going to cut the death of Socrates, even though I like it a lot. The death of Marat is more influential. Okay. Friedrich, Monastery Graveyard in the Snow. All right. Delacroix, Massacre at Chios. Again, I like this slide. I even took it. It was my own slide, but Villiers, Gura at Arizel isn't that well known, and we got to cut something here. So that ends up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I think that is 40%, but we're going to have to cut a few more, I can tell, when we get to the end. Okay, for now, we'll move on. Week 12. The Awakening Conscience, the second one down by Hunt. The Glass of Absinthe, we'll cross that out, even though it, again, it's a really interesting image, but not that famous. Monet, Rouen Cathedral Portal. Even though the other one's a longer title, it's much more famous, of course. Let's see. I hate to cut any Rodin, Renoir. Okay, one of the Renoirs. I think the harder one is the one with the spelling. Of course, again, you have the syllabus in front of you during the test. Actually, I'm going to leave that. The reason is that it shows his techniques of dappled sunlight on people, and it's set in Paris where he did most of his painting. So we'll cut The Luncheon of the Boating Party by Renoir. Let's see how many that is. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. 4 out of 12 is only a third. We got to cut at least one more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut, as much as I hate to do it, Rodin's The Thinker and leave The Kiss. Okay, so that's over 40% from week 12, but we're probably still going to be a little under the total for the entire list. When we get to the end, we'll calculate it. Okay, moving on now, week 13. Cézanne, Mount Sainte Victoire. One Cézanne is enough, I think. And I hate to do this with Van Gogh, but I'm going to cut The Starry Night. It's become a cliche, even though it shouldn't be, but it really is. I think the Wheatfield Cypress Trees is an equally, if not better, example of his color theory. Remember, that's part of the meaning of that one. And then Gauguin will cut Day of the God, which, by the way, is at the Art Institute of Chicago. 1, 2, 3. I don't think that's 40%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, it's 3 eighths. We don't want to cut one of each. Okay, you're going to think I'm going back on what I said a few minutes ago, but we didn't say for sure either way. I'm going to go ahead and cut Caillebotte, Paris, A Rainy Day, because Cézanne, even though he might be somebody you're less familiar with, the image of his self-portrait, he's a really important artist when it comes to post-impressionism. Caillebotte is on the cusp. Remember, he's neither fully impressionist nor post-impressionist. So Caillebotte, sorry about that one. First one under week 13, Paris, A Rainy Day. Cut that. All right. Now on the architecture. Let's see. We're going to cut Morgan, the administration building, because that's such a long title, but we're going to leave Hearst Castle. Okay. Got to cut one of the right, so we'll cut Falling Water, because the Roby House is more influential, although it's hard to say that about his work. All of it is, but of the two, it's a more important one. So right, the Falling Water slide we're cutting. Okay. I'll cut a couple more here. Sullivan. Boy, this hurts me because I wrote a book about the man. He's one of my idols, one of my heroes. But I'm going to cut the Maybach because the slide's not that good. I couldn't get a close-up view of it that wasn't watermarked, if you know what I mean. So Maybach, First Church of Christ scientist. Again, it's pains me to do that, but we got to, get to that 40%. Okay, and we'll restate all these, but only after we make the final cut, which may mean we have to go back. Okay, back. Now on week 15, okay, Le Corbusier, Villa Savoy, Mies van der Rohe and Johnson Sequin Building. Again, the longest, most complicated title I usually like to cut. Okay, that one. I'm going to cut Graves, the Portland Services Building, even though I like it, because we have one postmodern. All right. And that's out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Got to cut at least one more to get over 40%. You know what? I'm going to cut Johnson the Glass House. Not that I don't like the man, even though he was an arrogant so-and-so. That's not the point. The point is that the slide of it from the outside is a small slide. Again, it's the only one I could find that, wasn't difficult to download or otherwise protected views, So, okay, so there you go, Johnson the Glass House. Now, let's do a count from the first week of week 7 to the end and see if we cut 38. All right. Yeah, I'm going to repeat everything at the end. Absolutely. Yes. And then we'll still in about, about 8:30 at the latest, because we did start at 8 and not 7:55, the second portion. Okay, so moving back to week 7. Okay, let's count what we crossed out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 37. Everybody else get that? So I got to cut at least one more, and I might even go for 3 more. Let's see. All right, I tell you what, go back to week 7. I'm going to cut the mosque from Indonesia because we have a mosque at the Taj Mahal, and it's a much more important building, obviously. So everybody see this? Go back to week 7 and cut Kudus Minaret Mosque, Indonesia. And then under week 8, I'm going to cut Poet on a Mountaintop. So I'm going for a full 40 now. Okay. Poet on a Mountaintop from China under week 8. And one more. Otani Oniji acting. And that's at the bottom of week 8. All right, that's 40. That was the most I had promised. So let's do this, repeat this list one more time. I'll go through them slowly and just double check that you did correctly. Cross off all the right ones. Hang on. Quick coffee break there. All right, week 7, we're cutting 4. Kitab Minar from India. Akbar inspecting the construction of Fatehpur Sikri. Shwedagon Stupa from Burma, and Kudus Minaret Mosque from Indonesia. Week 8, we're cutting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ming Dynasty Flask from China. Poet on a Mountaintop from China. Ging Bang Mountains from China. A Landscape by Busai. Fusuma by the architect Aitoku. Lacquer Box, again, the artist is Korin, and Kitani Oniji acting. Of course, that's from Japan. All right, moving on to week 9. We're cutting 4. Templo Mayor from Mexico City, Llama from Bolivia, Bandolier Bag from Kansas, and Taos Pueblo, New Mexico. At week 10, we're cutting 3. Car Figure from Storehouse Doorway, New Zealand. Decorated building in the Royal Compound, Republic of Congo, and Reliquary Garden, Gabon, late 1800s. Just a quick note, we just received, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but all of the instructors in the art department, we're going to have to revise our syllabi, and I understand the logic behind it, but I can go ahead and tell you one thing I won't have to do is add art from non-Western sources, because I've never felt that that was adequate to cover world art, you know, or even art history in general. And the other teachers who haven't, they're going to have to add more slides from places like, that's one reason I didn't cut more than a few from Africa and the Pacific Island cultures, because there's already little enough of that. All right, just a quick footnote. All right, that was week 10. Right, everybody got that? Week 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're cutting the Gilles Lebrun, Marie Antoinette with her children. David or David, death of Socrates. Villiers, girl at her easel. Friedrich, monastery graveyard in the snow. And Delacroix, the massacre at Chios. Okay, moving on to week 12. We're cutting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hunt, the awakening conscience. Renoir, luncheon of the boating party. Degas, the glass of absinthe. Monet, Rouen Cathedral portal. And Rodin, the thinker. Week 13, we're cutting 4. Caillebotte, Paris, a rainy day. Cézanne, Mont Sainte Victoire. Van Gogh, Starry Night. And Gauguin, Day of the God. Week 14, we're cutting 4 more. Wright, Falling Water. Maybeck, First Church of Christ Scientist. Morgan, Administration Building. And then finally, week 15, we're cutting 4 more. Le Corbusier, Villa Savoy. Johnson, the Glass House. Mies van der Rohe and Johnson, Seagram Building. And finally, Graves, Portland Services Building. Okay, that's well over 40%. It's more like 45. And that leaves you with a nice even 40 slides that you should be studying. Okay, moving on to the terms to know, that list. Let's do that together. We should have that in front of you. And then I'll recap how the test can be given, and then open it to any questions that people still have. Okay, so when this list was printed, I didn't divide it between the midterm, right? And those terms from the before the midterm and those after, or between the midterm and the final, which you're responsible for. So I can tell you what that is. If you take the list, in fact, I'll just show you. The last section I had left on the list to study for the midterm was this one, the 4 main features of Baroque art. Remember, these will appear in the true false section of the test, just like they did some of the earlier terms on the midterm. So we've got, let's see how many terms from Gopura on to the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A nice round 20. So 40% of that is 8. That will leave you only 12 terms. That's pretty reasonable to have to study. Okay, so let's do this together, and then I'll repeat it at the end, and then stick around. Well, summarize before you all take off. Just as a quick reminder, how the test is going to be given, and the way you should study for it, and the way to answer your questions the most effectively to get the highest total score. Okay, so we're going from Gopura down. Okay. We're going to cross out stupa because I cut, I think it's the only stupa that was on the list. Also going to cut pagoda on the next page. And it may sound odd, but I'm going to cut the Mayan bloodletting ritual because the slides that I didn't cut, right, that we just went over and remain on that list, doesn't include one of that ritual. Mayan bloodletting ritual, okay. All right, and then we have, okay. I'm going to cut the 4 main features of first Bay tradition architecture. Even though it's important, I did cut Maybeck, which is the most relevant one. And Julia Morgan, I'm going to tell you this if you didn't notice or somehow haven't seen that lecture with her, Julia Morgan and Maybeck's work on it. You definitely want to study the remaining slide. I think it's only one now of her work, and any others that are from the Bay Area, which there aren't that many actually, because the First Bay tradition is not by itself represented as the remaining slides, because Julia Morgan's Hearst Castle is not First Bay tradition. I think I covered that pretty carefully. It was for an egomaniac, and he didn't care if the build he didn't want his buildings to blend in with the environment and be, he didn't care about green design or any of that stuff that Julia Morgan and Maybeck had been practicing for decades. He just wanted to show off his wealth. And so that isn't, even though it's on the list now, but it's her most famous building. It's iconic. It's been used in movies and TV shows and documentaries. And of course, she's an important person. So you do want to study her, the notes on who she was. But you get a break here. You don't have to remember the 4 features of of First Bay tradition. So we're not yet there. We need to cut a couple more. Let's see. Romantic art, we are leaving that on. Let's see. Okay. Well, here we go. Some of these are going to be, you know this, but if it's not obvious, it's for your sake. When you're studying, even though I may be cutting definitions, which are part of the meaning of some of the remaining slides, you should still know how to describe, those features if one of those slides is on. I'll give you an example. Gopura. We'll cut that. But we left a slide on, and it could be on the final, of a Gopura. So you see my point. I hope that's clear. That I, we got to cut this list down so that that's not going to appear on the true false section. For sure. There won't be a question trying to, trick questions, because yes, they are. I mean, I have to have something to divide the A's from the B's, right? Or at least to see who really took good notes. So Gopura, you don't have to worry about appearing on the definition portion or true false section of this final. But if the slide of it, which is in South Asian art, and we didn't cut it, then you might want to mention what they are. Okay, that's clear, I think, to everybody. All right. How do we cut now here? 1, 2, we have to cut 8, 3, 4, 5. We got to cut 3 more. Okay. Well, I'm going to cut synthetism, partly because it's hard to pronounce, but it's not the main reason. Because we got to cut one of these slides. But pointillism and building blocks of color, you definitely want to study those. Not impressionism, that could easily appear on the final. So now we get 2 more we have to cut. I'm going to cut the word mogul, even though it's relevant. Again, just like I said before about, Gopura, it's relevant to, well, the Taj Mahal. But again, if you're studying no notes you already took on what the Taj Mahal is and who built it, you know, of course, that the word mogul comes up in any essay answer you might give. I hope that's clear. And then it's a very difficult thing. I don't want to cut minaret. Buddhism, definitely not, because it will have a high possibility of being on the true-false section. And I want to leave at least 1 Chinese term, 1 Japanese term. Let's see. Okay, English realism. We'll cut that, even though there is a slide that we might get. I didn't cut, which is, of course, the last of England. Let's see. I think that's 8 from the second half. And I'll repeat the list, but let me count first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so you do need to know. I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate all 5 of them. I might say the 5 main movements of early architecture, since I'm not cutting this on the true false, I might say something like include, let's say, Chicago School or early skyscrapers, Prairie School or early houses, and Beaux-Arts. Beaux-Arts, no, that's from the 1800s. It's not modern. It's real revival of Renaissance architecture. So you'd know that was false. That's how that might appear, if it is at all on the final. Okay, so I'll repeat them. That is 40% literally, and that's 8 we cut. So looking at the list, page 2, just double check that you all have the same reduced list. The first one to cross out was Gopura, then Stupa, then Mogul, then Pagoda on the next page, of course, Mayan bloodletting ritual, and at the bottom, English realism. And then on the last page, synthetism, and 4 main features of first Bay tradition architecture. That leaves you with only 12 terms to study, of which 5 will appear on the true false section of the final. Beg my knee here. Okay, so let's just make sure everyone's clear that this is exactly the same format. A few people joined us later, so that's why I'm holding this up again. As the midterm was, it'll be a PDF, and I will send it to you by 5 p.m. on Tuesday. That does mean that you should be checking but you're supposed to do that anyway. Check your email, not just for the Zoom meeting information. You should have this printed out. I will remind you with yet another, of course, email, but it's the same as was before, which means that this should be with you, next to you. And yes, you can have your syllabus because obviously we can't monitor that. So you get that open book advantage. I would have those right next to you. Now, if you wrote notes on the meaning of the terms, remaining 12 terms, you might want to have those notes with you too. But in any case, you will have, remember, this is going to be exactly the same as the midterm, but no slides from before the midterm will be on the final. You'll have 5 slides to identify, and I'm giving you 2 minutes. When I do an in-person class, it's 1 minute. That's all that Dr. Sarah Gale used to give, or Allison Hindenburg. So, these are the long-term, emeritus, they're now retired professors who helped create the art history program at Berkeley. They were there when I was hired. They interviewed me for this. And they always gave just 1 minute, but you guys have 2 whole minutes. So you may want to have, something to munch on, but not loudly. Okay. The point is that's going to be in the first 10 minutes. The test will start at 6:45. So you have plenty of time to check in. Make sure you have the printout, this in front of you, so you can either fill it in and then do a screenshot, or you can create your own document, however you want to. It doesn't matter to me what format you use to, if you choose to digitally answer these questions. It's your choice, but you need to send it to me, and it's right on here as a PDF, okay, to my email account at markw@aol. That's already in the I just created the test today, and that will be there. You'll see the exact instructions, because that is much easier to website for me and the other teachers I've talked to navigate than Outlook. Outlook is so cumbersome. So that's how you need to send me your tests, and you will have the full hour. The test is geared for an hour, and then I will post it, not repost it, by Thursday, 5 p.m. Thursday. That is next week. So it's 9 days from now. And that'll be up for exactly 48 hours for both classes. So no class has an advantage over either other, the other class. Each of all my students have the exact same opportunities. You have 2 full days, 48 hours to go back and double check your answers. Or if you couldn't be at the test for some reason, you can see it and then take it that way. I hope you'll attend though live, because that's when you really can make sure there's not something you're unclear about, or if you have questions that relate to either. But of course, not during the test. They can't be verbal questions. You can give me, of course, questions in the chat format if it's urgent. But anyway, the point is you have 15 minutes to get logged in, get your paperwork ready, sitting next to you on your laptop or whatever, your mainframe. And then the test starts with the first slide. And so if you miss the first 10 minutes, well, you can go back and see if that's true in this kind of class. But why do that? Get it off your plate if you can, the slide identification, then go back and double check your answers. And then, of course, you have 15 minutes each for the short essays, and 10 minutes total for the true false, 5 true false, in which you will see, of course, they're pretty straightforward. And if you've done the proper studying and you have your notes in front of you, you should be able to get all those correct. And all you have to write is a T or an F, unless you want to write the full word, true, false. That's for 10 minutes. You get 2 minutes for each one. And then 15 minutes which will end up being exactly an hour. And assuming that there's no glitches, technical, I'm talking about technological, there shouldn't be, the weather shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to finish up at 7:45. And then just like every class, I'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards for anyone that has questions. And then you can send me your test if you think you've done as well as you can right away. That would be nice. I can get started grading them. But you have until 5 p.m. on Saturday to turn them in. Okay, any questions from anybody? Because we've covered quite a bit here, but I think it should be not too stressful for you now that you know the procedure. And of course, it's worth 100 points, 1/4 of your grade. And there's an extra credit optional slide. Oh yeah, that means that they're actually, it'll go a little over an hour. Unless you choose not to do the extra credit, but believe me, I've seen people miss an A or a B by less than 5 points at the end of the semester. And so it's an optional, easy, just like the one before. It's a slide of a real person in a real place, and I'll tell you what the story was. And you can then just write 5 sentences of your choosing, and you don't get graded on content, style, grammar, spelling, no analysis. It's just make up a short little paragraph. Yes, Louise. Oh, week 15, no problem. That's part of what we're here for. You can ask that either way, verbally or not. Okay, I crossed out 4. On week 15, it was Le Corbusier, Villa Savoy. Then right below that, Johnson, the Glass House. And then below that, Mies van der Rohe and Johnson, the Seeger building. And the last one I cut was the Graves Portland Services building. Okay. So this is a good time to ask any questions relating to the test. And don't forget the extra credit options. Still, only one person in either of my classes this semester has gotten the full 50 points. So you all have some margin you could add as, for safety or for cushion if you choose to. But the deadline for that is the same as is the day before. Sorry, I meant to say the exam is due by Friday. I'll put that in an email. For extra credit, late papers have to be turned in before the final. I've said that all semester. I shouldn't even let it be that late. I used to say it had to be the Friday before the final. So if you still have, either extra credit or hadn't done your second paper, you can take over the weekend, but definitely don't push past Monday because the test is Tuesday, 1 week from tonight, of course. Okay, we covered a lot. Hopefully it's helpful to everyone. Anybody have any other questions that I didn't answer?
I do. On week 12, were you cutting 5 or 6 slides?
Okay, sure. Go back. Let's do that right together. I cut 5, and those are Hunt, The Awakening Conscience, Renoir, Luncheon of the Boating Party, Degas, The Glass of Absinthe, Monet, Rouen Cathedral, Portal, and Rodin, The Thinker. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Anybody else, any of that type of question, any other kind of question relating to grades, as long as it's not to ask me to tell you, I wouldn't do that. It's not meant to be public, the exact grade you got on. There are still a few late papers I haven't, not many, that I got by now that I haven't graded, and I'll do those in the next 2 days. There aren't that many. Almost everybody else has gotten theirs back. So if you still have a question about your total points before the exam, it's a good thing to check if you don't already know. Just shoot me an email. I can do it that way. Okay, let's see. I'm not seeing you because sometimes I don't catch the chat questions at the top or bottom of the screen, but I don't see any others. Okay, anybody have any other questions you want to ask? Verbally is fine at this point, unless you really just prefer to do the chat, because you won't have a chance to ask any other kinds of questions except about the test requirements, not the slides on it, before the test next week, or email me with questions, any questions relating to the grading, the extra credit, or deadlines. But you'll get another email reminding you of the specific deadlines for both the test and any remaining paper and extra credit. Okay, I think we covered everything. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, good luck with this and all your other classes, and I'm sure you all do well on the test if you just take out those great notes you took. You don't need to do flashcards, right? And this one, all right, good night.
Good night.
Yeah, you guys take care. Have a good